Hello students, my name is Niyati Said and thanks for watching Edupedia word videos. My topic for the presentation is breathing and exchange of gases. So let's proceed towards our topic. As we know, oxygen is utilized by the organism to indirectly break down nutrient molecules like glucose and to derive energy for performing various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is very harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reactions. It is therefore evident that O2 has to be continuously provided to the cells and the carbon dioxide produced by the cells have to be released out. This process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cells is called breathing, and it is commonly known as respiration. Just place your hand on your chest. You can feel the chest moving up and down. You know that it is due to breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing I'm going to describe you in this chapter. Okay, so what is respiration? Respiration refers to the process of obtaining oxygen and delivering it to the cells for cellular respiration and removing carbon dioxide produced by cells. Okay. Now, what is respiration? Respiration is the oxidation of nutrients in the living cells to release energy for biological work. Now, what is breathing? Breathing is the exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with the carbon dioxide produced by the cells. Okay. Now, respiration has two stages. One is external respiration and another is internal respiration. External respiration is known as breathing, whereas internal respiration means cellular respiration. Okay, and this cellular respiration is again bifurcated into two. One is aerobic and other is anaerobic. Okay. Now, just a question may arise: what's the difference between external respiration and internal respiration? Then external respiration or breathing is a process of inhaling the air into the lungs and expelling the air that contains more carbon dioxide from the lungs to the outer environment. Exchange of gases in and out of the blood also takes place simultaneously. External respiration is a physical process in which oxygen is taken up by capillaries of lung alveoli and carbon dioxide which is released from the blood. Okay, and now the question arises: what is internal respiration and how is it different from the external respiration? Then internal respiration is a metabolic process during which oxygen is released to tissues and the carbon dioxide is absorbed by the blood. Once inside the cell, the oxygen is utilized for the production of energy in the form of ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate, and it is again of two types: aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Okay. Now let's see external respiration or the breathing in detail. So what is it? The exchange of respiratory gases, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide, between the body and the environment. Okay. Now, what is internal respiration? It is also known as cellular respiration. It is a metabolic process which occurs in cell, involves oxidation of organic molecules to produce energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate, which is controlled by enzymes which are of two types. One is aerobic respiration and another is anaerobic respiration. Okay. You know, students, what's the main substrate to produce energy in cellular respiration? Of course, it's a glucose. Okay. Now, as we know that cellular respiration is of two types, aerobic and the anaerobic. So, aerobic respiration we'll be studying in detail here. Aerobic respiration, as the name suggests, that it requires oxygen. Glucose, which is a main substrate of respiration, is completely oxidized to produce 36 to 38 molecules of ATP, and around 2898 kilojoule, which is a very high energy, is released. Okay. It takes place in the cytoplasm and the mitochondria of cells. Okay. As you can see, glucose, when it gets combined with then oxygen, then it produces carbon dioxide, it produces water, and it produces energy, which is around 2898 kilojoule, which is a very high energy. Okay. And now comes anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration means that the one that doesn't involve oxygen. Glucose is not completely broken down to energy. Microorganisms live in animal intestine, in soil or sediment underlying lakes, and active contractile muscles. Okay, and they release only 2 ATP, which is a very low energy as compared to aerobic respiration, which involves 2898 kilojoule of energy. And unlike aerobic respiration, it takes place in the cytoplasm. Okay. Muscle cells. We very well know that muscle cells involve anaerobic respiration. So the prolonged physical activity, or you can say the exercise, O2 supplied is not enough, or in the other sentence you can say that oxygen needed in the prolonged physical activity is more than the oxygen supplied. So the muscle cells, they undergo anaerobic respiration. Muscles in a state of O2 deficiency or the O2 depth occurs. Okay. Oxygen depth. What is oxygen depth? Oxygen depth is in which muscle cells, they produce ATP without oxygen, without involving oxygen. Okay. As we very well know that glucose molecule, they break down partially into intermediate substance, which is known as lactic acid. Okay. This is glucose, and it is broken down partially into lactic acid, which is an intermediate, and 150 kilojoule of energy is released. Energy is low because much of energy is still trapped within the molecules of the lactic acid, which are the two molecules of lactic acid are present. Okay. And high concentration of lactic acid may also cause muscular cramp, fatigue, and tiredness. Okay. After the activity, the person needs to breathe deeply, it is known, and rapidly to inhale more oxygen. Oxygen is used to oxidize accumulated lactic acid to form carbon dioxide and water, which occurs mainly in liver. Okay. So what happens is, lactic acid, when it gets combined with an oxygen, then it produces CO2, water, and energy. Remaining lactic acid gets converted into glycogen, and it is stored in muscle cells. Okay. Now what is oxygen depth? It is paid off when all of the lactic acid is removed. That means increasing the breathing rate after vigorous activity. Oxygen depth, it is the amount of oxygen needed to remove lactic acid from the muscle cells. Okay. As you can see, glucose, when it got combined with an oxygen, then it produces CO2, H2O, and energy. Okay. Now what happens in yeast? In yeast also anaerobic respiration takes place. So anaerobic respiration in yeast is also known as fermentation. Okay. As you can see, this is a one molecule of a glucose. In presence of an enzyme zymase, it produces CO2, this is ethanol, C2H5OH, and this is carbon dioxide. Sorry, I have written ethanol under CO2 by mistake, but this is ethanol, and energy, which is about 210 kilojoule. Okay. Ethanol can be used in wine and the beer production. Okay. CO2 it released causes the dough to rise, that is meant for making bread. Okay. Now Why aerobic respiration produces more energy than the anaerobic respiration? Any guesses, students? Now we'll be studying chemistry of respiration to understand that better. Okay. What is ATP? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. The energy which is released during respiration is not used directly by cells. Instead, it is used to make a molecule called ATP, which stores the energy until it is needed. What does ATP do now? ATP supplies energy for the process that need it. Okay, for example, as we move, okay, as we grow, so all these processes, they require energy. So ATP is the main source of energy supplying. Okay, now what's the structure of ATP? Adenosine triphosphate means tri-inorganic phosphates. 3 inorganic phosphates. IP or PI means inorganic phosphate. Okay. Now the formation of ATP. ATP is made when another molecule called adenosine diphosphate, which is ADP, is bonded to the third inorganic phosphate, which is PI. That uses the energy released from the glucose. Adenosine diphosphate, as you can see, there are 2 inorganic phosphate which are attached to the adenosine. When it gets combined with the third inorganic phosphate, then it produces what? Of course, ATP. That is adenosine triphosphate. Okay. As you can see, when adenosine diphosphate is combined with one molecule of inorganic phosphate, then the energy is obtained from the respiration process. Okay, and the bond which is formed between adenosine diphosphate and the one inorganic phosphate, which is a very energy rich bond. Okay, how can it be summarized? ADP plus PI, that means inorganic phosphate, it forms adenosine triphosphate, and the whole process is under the control of enzymes. Okay. Now the role of ATP. ATP stores the energy in the third bond of the molecule. The energy is released when that bond is broken to release the third inorganic phosphate. Okay. This is adenosine triphosphate, and this red bond is a, what is it? It is a very energy rich bond which is formed between adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate. Okay, and in presence of enzyme, it produces adenosine diphosphate and PI, that is inorganic phosphate, and energy is released to do the product. Now you will understand better that how energy is released to do the work, to do the movement, to for growing. Okay, so this is the energy which we obtain it to do work. Okay, now what's the summary? This is the cellular respiration. It produces energy which goes to the formation of ATP, and the energy is out for the cell activity such as movement, such as growth, etc. Okay, and the ATP is again broken down into ADP and PI. Okay, so I hope it's clear to all of you. The whole process is an enzyme controlled reaction. Now comes the aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration means respiration with oxygen, the one which involves oxygen. Okay, so the glucose C6H12O6, when it gets add up with an oxygen, then it produces energy, carbon dioxide and water to make ATP. Okay, aerobic respiration, it happens in 2 stages. What is the first stage? Glycolysis. As you can see, glyco means glycogen and lysis means breakdown. Okay, glucose splitting or breakdown. In glycolysis, a glucose molecule is broken down into pyruvic acid. Okay, as you can see, glucose, the energy is released to make a small quantity of ATP, which are of two molecules. Okay, and it is a series of enzyme controlled reaction, of course, and it produces pyruvic acid. So this is the process of glycolysis, in which the glucose molecule is broken down into pyruvic acid, and it is a series of enzyme controlled reactions. Okay, glycolysis doesn't require oxygen. Okay, now what's the stage second? Stage second is involves breakdown of pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid, which is made in the glycolysis, still contains a lot of energy. Okay, it can only be broken down to release the rest of the energy in the presence of oxygen. So the pyruvic acid, of course, it is a series of enzyme controlled reaction, and pyruvic acid gets converted into carbon dioxide and water. So the energy released to make large quantity of ATP, which is around 36 molecules, is formed. Okay. Now is the summary. Glucose gets converted into pyruvic acid, and the pyruvic acid gets converted into carbon dioxide and water. 2 ATP is released when the glucose gets converted into pyruvic acid, and around 36 ATP are released when the pyruvic acid gets converted into carbon dioxide and water. Okay. Summary of ATP production is stage 1, that is the glucose breakdown to the pyruvic acid, and the stage 2, in which the pyruvic acid gets converted into carbon dioxide and water. So stage 1 and stage 2 release all the chemical energy in one molecule of glucose to make a total of 38 ATP molecules. So the 2 molecules ATP from glucose give rise to pyruvic acid, and 36 molecules ATP from the pyruvic acid to carbon dioxide plus water. So all in all, total 38 molecule of ATP is produced in glycolysis process. 36 plus 2, that is 38. So the total 38 molecule ATP is produced. Now comes the anaerobic respiration in animals, which doesn't involve oxygen. Okay. In low oxygen conditions or during heavy exercise, when not enough oxygen can be supplied, muscle cells swap to anaerobic respiration. Okay. Glucose, when it gets converted into pyruvic acid, it produces 2 ATP. So glycolysis still happens, as it does not require oxygen. Okay. And pyruvic acid gets converted into lactic acid in absence of oxygen. Okay. And in the presence of oxygen, remember students, pyruvic acid used to get converted into carbon dioxide and water. But in the anaerobic respiration, pyruvic acid, in the absence of oxygen, it gets turned into lactic acid. Okay. A buildup of lactic acid produces muscle fatigue. Okay. Muscle fatigue makes muscle ache and contract less powerfully. A recovery period is needed. During this time, more oxygen is taken to convert the lactic acid back into the pyruvic acid again. So the volume of oxygen needed is called a oxygen depth. So what's the summary? The glucose, when it gets converted into pyruvic acid under the influence of oxygen depth, it gets converted into lactic acid. Okay. For example, during hard exercises, and lactic acid can also get converted into the pyruvic acid. Okay. So oxygen depth repeat during the recovery time. That's the reason lactic acid gets converted into pyruvic acid. Okay. Now what's the comparison between aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration? What are the similarities that involves aerobic and anaerobic respiration? First is to form cellular respiration. Second, to involve the breakdown of glucose. Third, to produce energy. And fourth, they are catalyzed by enzyme. As we know that it is a series of enzyme controlled process, and it occurs in animals and plants. Okay. So what's the comparison between aerobic and the anaerobic respiration? As you can see that this is aerobic and this is anaerobic respiration, and these are the items. Aerobic respiration, almost every living cells, works by almost every living cells, whereas in anaerobic respiration it is worked by certain plants, yeast, bacteria, and of course the muscles of the animals. Oxygen is required in aerobic respiration, whereas it is not required in anaerobic respiration. Oxidation of glucose is complete in case of aerobic respiration, whereas it is incomplete in case of anaerobic respiration. What are the products which are formed in aerobic respiration is CO2, water, and energy. Okay, whereas in anaerobic respiration, in yeast, CO2, ethanol, and energy is released, and in muscles, lactic acid and energy is released. Okay. Now, what's the comparison between aerobic and the anaerobic respiration? Energy release is large in terms of aerobic respiration, whereas it is very small in terms of anaerobic respiration. Okay. Site, where does it takes place? Aerobic respiration, it takes place in mitochondria and cytoplasm, whereas anaerobic respiration, it takes place in cytoplasm. Chemical equation of aerobic respiration is when the glucose, when it gets combined with an oxygen, it produces CO2, H2O, and 2898 kilojoule of energy. And in yeast, glucose, when it's broken down, and it produces CO2, ethanol, and energy. Whereas in muscle cells, glucose is broken down into lactic acid and 150 kilojoule energy, which is very less as compared to aerobic respiration, which is around 2898 kilojoule energy. Around 38 molecules of ATP is produced in aerobic respiration, whereas around 2 molecules of ATP is produced in anaerobic respiration. So I hope now it's clear to all of you what's the comparison between aerobic and the anaerobic respiration. Now, what are the fuels for cell respiration? Of course, the main substrate is glucose. So the free glucose molecules are not common in our diet. We obtain most of our calories as fat, protein, sucrose, and other disaccharide sugars and starch. Carbohydrate, that means polysaccharides and starch. Enzyme in our digestive tract hydrolyze starch to glucose, and the glycogen can be hydrolyzed to glucose to serve as fuel between meals. Apart from polysaccharide, there are proteins. First must be digested to their constituent amino acids. Typically, cell will use most of its amino acid to make its own protein, but enzyme will convert excess amino acid to intermediates of glycolysis or the Krebs cycles, and their energy is harvested by cell respiration. Okay, and apart from protein and polysaccharide, there are fats which are also used as a fuel for the cell respiration. It is an excellent cellular fuel. They contain many hydrogen atoms and thus many energy rich electrons. Cell first hydrolyze fat to glycerol and fatty acid. It converts glycerol to G3P, and fatty acids are broken into 2 carbon fragments that enter the Krebs as acetyl-CoA, that is acetylcholine A. 1 gram of fat yields more than twice as much as ATP as gram of starch. Okay, because so many calories are in each gram of fat, and a person must expend a large amount of energy to burn fat stored in the body. Okay, so food is also used as a raw material a cell uses for biosynthesis to make its own molecule for repair and growth, not just for ATP. To make cells, tissue, and organism, amino acid produces protein, fatty acid and glycerol produces fat, and sugar produces carbohydrates. Okay, now what are the respiratory organs? Respiratory organ, in case of lower invertebrate like sponges, coelentrates, flatworm, etc., it is through general body surface. In earthworm, leech, and amphibians, through skin or the moist cuticle. In insects, centipede, millipede, and spider, it is through the tracheal tubes. And in case of fishes, tadpoles, prawn, it is through gills or the branchial respiration. Okay, and in most of the vertebrates, it is through the lung, and that process is known as pulmonary respiration. Okay. Now, correlate the rate of respiration with the rate of heartbeat. During vigorous exercise, the muscle require more oxygen and glucose to release more energy during cell respiration, and therefore the rate of respiration also increases. In order to supply more oxygen, the rate and the depth of breathing increases. This means the breathing rate increases, number of breath per minute. Okay. At the same time, the heartbeat rate increases to pump more blood into circulation. The change in breathing rate after completing a vigorous exercise under normal condition 15 to 20 times per minute, but after a vigorous exercises get converted into around 30 to 35 times per minute. And the change in the rate of heartbeat after completing a vigorous exercise under normal conditions 60 to 70 beats per minute, and after vigorous exercise it exceeds to 120 beats per minute. Okay, and the whole respiration is controlled by medulla oblongata, which is in the brain, and it sends the impulse and that controls the respiration rate, and then impulse it has an impact on the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. We'll be studying intercostal muscle and diaphragm in detail in my next section of my presentation. Okay, and it also helps to monitor carbon dioxide level, and it thus regulates the amount of carbon dioxide released during exhalations. Okay. Now, the large number of alveoli in the lungs or the air sacs in the lungs increase surface area for the gaseous exchanges there. When the walls are made up of a single of cells, gases can diffuse rapidly across the thin walls. Walls secrete a thin lining of moisture. Gases can dissolve in moisture and can diffuse easily across the walls, and it is surrounded by the network of blood capillaries which can transport oxygen and carbon dioxide efficiently. Okay, so as we very well know that there are two processes. One is inhalation, which is also known as inspiration, and the exhalation. So